Alright, coming in at number 10, we have space snakes. Dr. Musgrave is a trustworthy man, or at least his credentials suggest he must be. Not only is he a NASA astronaut, he has 6 degrees, and he's a doctor and a mathematician. He has made 6 space flights, and he believes that there is life out there. In 1994, he said, "On 2 of my missions, and I still don't have an answer, I have seen a snake out there." What? It's not just a wee little space snake either. He said that it was 6, 7 or 8 feet long. He said that the snake followed him around for a long period of time and he tried to communicate with it. Space snakes, honestly. Dr. Musgrave thinks that they must have their own propulsion technique, which honestly is just baffling and is a can of worms or snakes. Coming in at number 9, we have asteroids. Astronaut Chris Hadfield conducted a Reddit AMA and he discussed something that scared him. He said, "Sometimes we hear pings as tiny rocks hit our spaceship, and also the creaks and snaps of expanding metal as we go in and out of sunlight. The solar panels are filled with tiny holes from micrometeorites." Honestly, that really terrifies me as a person who's like a bit scared of flying in an aeroplane. This would deeply stress me out. He also said, "I watched a large meteorite burn up between me and Australia, and to think of that hypersonic dumb lump of rock randomly hurtling into us instead sent a shiver up my back." Like, I'll say Chris, mate, Jesus. Coming into number 8, we have the Formation. Gordon Cooper, the last American to spend time in space alone, has had a couple of very strange experiences in the skies. The first happened when he was a member of the Air Force. He was flying with other pilots in 1951 when he saw, I quote, "a vast armada of UFOs flying in formation at extremely high altitudes." I'm sorry, but vast armada, that is terrifying, not just one curious UFO, a whole fleet. On top of that, in 1963, Cooper was shot into space aboard a Mercury capsule to circumnavigate the world. As he was passing Perth, he noticed a fast-flying green object that was also picked up by Australian tracking systems. Now, the press were briefed that they were not allowed to talk to him about this. Why? Like, seriously, why? Coming into number 7, we have the check mark. American astronaut Leroy Chiao was the commander of the International Space Station in 2005. During his time up there, he saw some extremely weird things. He explained his encounter to the Huffington Post by saying, "I saw some lights that seemed to be in a line and it was almost like an upside down check mark, and I saw them fly by and I thought it was awfully strange." Could this have been the formation that Cooper was talking about? Some skeptics even tried to pass the lights off as far off fishing boat lights from Earth, but to be honest, I'm skeptical of those skeptics. Coming in at number 6, we have magnificent desolation. What is it like on the moon? Utterly terrifying according to Buzz Aldrin. Buzz, as we know, was the second man on the moon. Yes, televised recordings of the moon can be seen, and yes, we have high-res photographs, but truly knowing what it feels like to be up there is something only a handful of people can talk to us about. In a Reddit AMA, Buzz Aldrin describes his experience. He said, "My first words of my impression of being on the surface of the moon that just came to my mind are magnificent desolation." He continued by saying, "There is no place on Earth as desolate as what I was viewing in those first few moments on the lunar surface. Beyond me, I could see the moon curving away, no atmosphere, black sky, cold, colder than anyone could experience on Earth when the sun is up." While that sounds totally incredible, it also sounds like the beginnings of a total existential breakdown. Coming into number 5, we have the spheres. In 1981, following the Saljut mission, the USSR cosmonaut Major General Vladimir Kolyvanok gave a press conference in which he shared some very interesting information. He said that he looked out of a porthole and saw something he simply couldn't explain, something impossible to the laws of physics. He described the object he saw as spherical and elliptical, saying that it exploded into a beautiful golden light. After that, he saw 2 more spheres and a white smoke sphere cloud. Then, as they flew through the Terminator, the name for the zone between light and day, he lost sight of them. Honestly, how fascinating and terrifying at the very same time. To me, it's also weird and interesting how Russia appears to be more forthcoming in discussing things that they've seen in space, whereas the United States are keen to keep a lid on it. Why do you think the United States are so heavily guarded on what they'll say about what they've seen in space? Honestly, I don't know. Coming into number 4, we have the knocking. In 2003, Yang Liwei was the first Chinese astronaut to be propelled into space. Now I understand the loneliness of space might send you a little bit mad, but he said one night that he heard a strange and continuous knocking. He said, and I quote, "Someone was knocking on the body of the spaceship just as knocking an iron bucket with a wooden hammer. It neither came from outside nor inside the spaceship." I'm sorry, but honestly, what? Isn't that some of the creepiest space descriptions that you've ever heard? It seems he wasn't the last to hear it either. 2 further astronauts heard the same space knocks when they went up there. What are these? Coming into number 3, we have the music. Listening to the transcript of the words said on board Apollo 10 is bone-chilling. The spaceship passed by the dark side of the moon, and as it did, the astronauts heard a very weird ethereal music. This is what was said between Eugene Cernan, Thomas Stafford, and John Young. That music sounds out of spacey, doesn't it? Do you hear that whistling sound? Yes. Boy, that sure is weird music. We're gonna have to find out about that. Nobody will believe us. Later, Cernan said, "That eerie music is what's bothering me. You know what? I hear it too." Who is going to believe it? Nobody. Should we tell them about it? I don't know, I think we ought to think about it some. It seems that the Apollo 11 crew heard it too. What was it? We don't really know. Coming into number 2, we have heat is rising in the capsule. So this is really sad and really disturbing, so do skip forward if you aren't ready for something truly terrifying. In 1967, Russian cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov did not make it back to Earth alive, something he suspected would happen when he agreed to be the solo pilot of the Soyuz 1. His spacecraft malfunctioned and he was quite aware he was going to die. Some of the last things he said can't be translated into words. He was screaming and crying words of anger. Among the last words that can be deciphered are "the heat is rising in the capsule" and "you've killed me." Honestly, that makes me so sad. Finally, coming into number 1, we have "they're watching us." Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon, had something very scary to say when he arrived at the moon in the Apollo 11 mission. It was something he spoke about once but never spoke about again. In a secret transmission to NASA, according to the retired chief of communications system Maurice Chatelain, the first man on the moon's first words were actually, "Oh God, you won't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecraft out here lined up on the far side of the crater's edge. They're on the moon watching us." Now this wasn't heard by the world as the broadcast was dropped for 2 minutes. Armstrong never spoke about it again, although a lot of credible sources have confirmed that this is what he said.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have the Fireflies. In February 1962, John Glenn noticed something strange outside the window while aboard the Friendship 7 spacecraft. He noticed strange glowing particles floating in space nearby that looked like fireflies. He radioed down to mission control saying, "This is Friendship 7. I'll try to describe what I'm in here. I'm in a big mass of some very small particles that are brilliantly lit up like they're luminescent. I never saw anything like it. They're round a little, they're coming by the capsule and they look like little stars. A whole shower of them coming by. They swirl around the capsule and go in front of the window and they're all brilliantly lighted. They probably average maybe 7 or 8 feet apart, but I can see them all down below me also." John then went on to say that they were moving very slowly and almost seemed to be matching his current speed. After a thorough investigation, NASA scientists deduced that the lights were probably frost flakes that were being lit up as they fell away from the craft. They admitted that that does kind of make them look like fireflies. Of course, there are still people out there online that insist this may have been first contact with some sort of glowing space bugs. Next up at number 9 now, we have the Glass Dome. Richard Hoagland is an author who wrote a conspiracy theory book about the Apollo missions called Dark Mission. Now in it, he claims that ancient builders constructed enormous domes enclosing huge areas of the moon's surface. They would have had water and air inside them at one point. He claims there are actually hidden lunar cities that appear blurred and distorted because they're being viewed through this glass. Of course, the next question is, where is he getting all this from? Well, he points out that Apollo 12 astronaut Alan Bean said that on that mission, space seen from the lunar surface was black but shiny as if it was being viewed through glass. Of course, Hoagland used this as proof of his glass dome theory, saying space should be velvet black, it should be inky black, it should be infinity, unending, deep, endless black, it shouldn't be shiny. This is something that Alan Bean has denied and does not claim himself, itself, but the story has gained traction among some conspiracy theory groups. Moving on to number 8 now, we have Musa Manarov. That's the name of this former cosmonaut who is known for spending 541 consecutive days in space. It's safe to say he was an experienced cosmonaut who received numerous awards and honors. In all those years, he never reported anything too out of the ordinary, except for one time in 1991. That year, Manarov was on a mission to the Mir space station and was filming a visiting space capsule dock nearby. He filmed its approach. As he filmed its approach, he saw an object that looked like it was coming off the spacecraft. Here's some of that footage so you can see for yourself.
And this by Musa Manarov is the best known one from Russia, I believe.
Okay, I think we can immediately, being out in space here, dismiss the possibility that this is
space is
a rock.
Now whatever that was, it freaked him out and he became convinced he had seen something unusual. He said he knew there was nothing that could come loose at that point during the docking procedure. As he continued to watch the object, it floated downwards and away from the capsule. When this footage began to be shared around the world, some people claimed it was nothing more than space junk, but Manarov said he knows what he saw up there and it was definitely not space junk. Next up at number 7 now guys, we have the dots. In March 2017, UFO hunters claimed they had found proof of aliens in NASA's own footage. The video in question shows astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti demonstrating how to operate window shutters on the ISS. Now as she talks to the camera in the video, we see several white objects coming into view. The UFO community quickly jumped on this and referred to it as the smoking gun. There was no denying a big alien cover-up now. Of course, there's always two sides to the story though. Scott Brando is a man who forensically examines alleged UFO pictures and videos. He gave this video the same treatment and concluded that the lights were either lens reflections or ice particles. Not quite as exciting, but maybe that's the truth. Moving on to number 6 now, we have the organic being. In August 2018, former NASA astronaut Leland Melvin tweeted out that he saw something curved and organic looking floating outside of his craft while aboard the space shuttle Atlantis. Naturally, the first thing he did was tell NASA about it, but they said what he was seeing was not extraterrestrial, but just a piece of ice. Now when he shared this story on Twitter, the Twitter account for UFO Sightings Daily asked him if he thought that NASA was lying about that. They believe that his opinion of something looking organic is much more reliable than the opinion of someone on the ground over 400 miles away. Melvin replied that he didn't think so, but you never know. Now some people even thought that Melvin might have made the whole thing up just to, I don't know, entertain people. All of this has left many questions about his story. Ice or organic being, only Melvin really knows. Moving on to number 5 now, we have the wolves. This is an incredible story, honestly. It's a terrifying account from Russian cosmonaut Alexei Leonov. Now in 1965 he famously performed the first spacewalk ever. It was a success, but it was very nearly a disaster. During the walk he experienced both air leaks in his suit and material unexpectedly stiffening. This meant he was almost unable to cram himself back inside the capsule. He actually had to lower his own suit pressure and risk getting the bends when he was inside. If that wasn't bad enough, his craft went off course during re-entry and landed in the Ural Mountains, where he and his commander were forced to wait for rescue as howling wolves began to encircle them. How crazy is that? Next time you guys think you've had a bad day, just spare a thought for Alexei Leonov. Alright, at the number 4 spot now guys, we have the cryptic message. In 2016, NASA astronaut Scott Kelly gave an interview that conspiracy theorists say contained cryptic messages about seeing aliens in space. In the video, he talked about his 340 days on the International Space Station, and then people say he slipped up and mentioned a cover-up by NASA and the US government. Kelly was asked about his body's response to being in space for so long. He said, and I quote, "Adjusting to space is easier than adjusting to Earth for me. I don't think I ever felt completely normal up there. I think coming back to gravity is harder than leaving gravity, so maybe the aliens got it a lot easier than we do." It was that mentioning of the word alien that sent alarm bells ringing among the conspiracy theorists. He also spoke about a virtual reality game that the astronauts play on the space station, which simulated an alien attack on the space station. Once again, conspiracy theorists were asking, why would NASA make such a violent game, especially one with such a terrifying scenario? Once again, this is one of those stories where it's NASA's word against people who just don't seem to trust NASA. What do you guys think though? Moving on to number 3 now, we have the flashing lights. This is a very famous set of stories if you're familiar with the moon landings. During the Apollo missions that took astronauts to the moon for the first time, several astronauts reported seeing strange flashing lights. They claimed that these lights flashed in their eyeballs even when their eyes were closed. On one mission, astronaut Charles Duke wore a helmet, closed his eyes, and he still described the light flashes he was seeing to his team. He said they were clusters of white streaks. They happened at the exact same moment that his helmet recorded cosmic rays passing through his helmet and his head. Coincidence? Well, apparently not. NASA confirmed that the astronauts were actually seeing cosmic rays, something we don't see here on Earth because they're all absorbed by our atmosphere. They're so powerful that you can even see them in space with your eyes closed. That's pretty mental. Moving on to the number 2 spot now, we have the floater. On the morning of August 19th, 2013, NASA astronaut Chris Cassidy noticed something floating outside of the International Space Station. Here's a little clip so you can see for yourself.
Chris Cassidy had noted an object that was floating past the station near the Station Progress 52 cargo ship.
Cassidy noticed this near the Progress cargo vehicle. He called down to Mission Control Houston and took some video of it. Now at first, NASA was just as confused as he was. Was this a UFO? It certainly fit the literal description of an unidentified flying object. After a lot of speculation, NASA said it was an antenna cover from Russia's Zvezda service module. However, many people remain totally unconvinced. They believe that the object is something extraterrestrial, not something of human origin, and that NASA has made up this cover story to avoid public alarm. Personally, as you might know by now, I believe NASA, but what do you guys think? And finally, at number 1 now, we have the saucer. This story comes from Donald Slayton, an astronaut during the Mercury missions. He revealed in an interview that he saw UFOs in 1951. He said, "I was testing a P-51 fighter in Minneapolis when I spotted this object. I was at about 10,000 feet on a nice, bright, sunny afternoon. I thought the object was a kite, then I realized that no kite is going to fly that high. As I got closer, it looked like a weather balloon, grey and about 3 feet in diameter, but as soon as I got behind the darn thing, it didn't look like a balloon anymore. It looked like a saucer, a disc. About the same time, I realized that it was suddenly going away from me, and there I was, running at about 300 miles per hour. I tracked it for a little way, and then all of a sudden the damn thing just took off. It pulled about a 45-degree climbing turn and accelerated and just flat disappeared." An interesting story, and it's of particular interest to UFO enthusiasts because neither Slayton or NASA has provided a rational explanation for this very speedy saucer. Starting off number 10 now, we have the knocking. In 2003, Yang Liwei became the first Chinese person in space. It was a historic occasion, but it also became famous for a creepy occurrence. In 2016, Yang told an interviewer that he heard someone knocking on the outside of the spaceship on that trip. He was terrified and tried to peek out of the porthole but couldn't see anything outside. When he got back to Earth, Yang described the sound to experts. He even tried to recreate it for them, but nobody could identify it. In the years since, many people have tried to explain this strange phenomenon. Some say it could have been some space debris, but others say that this is unlikely, as space debris is few and far between. Others claim it could be the expanding and contracting of the ship due to the changing temperature of the spaceship as it orbited the Earth. Even though that's the leading theory, many people have their own theories about aliens or time travelers being responsible for the mysterious knocking sound. Moving on to number 9 now, we have alien music. In 1969, American astronauts Tom Stafford, Gene Cernan and John Young went to the far side of the moon for the Apollo 10 mission. It was going to be the final test before Apollo 11 took 3 humans to walk on the surface of the moon for the first time. When the Apollo 10 astronauts were orbiting around the far side of the moon, they took photographs of its surface. As they were working away, they began to hear music. Specifically, they heard a strange whistling sound that lasted nearly an hour. When it faded away, Commander Cernan said, "Boy, that sure is weird music. We're going to have to find out about that. Pilot Young replied, "Nobody would believe us," and for the most part they were right. Many people couldn't explain the sound that they claimed to have heard, and so they just didn't believe it. The leading theory is that the sound came from radio interference between spacecrafts. Some people have dismissed that though, and have insisted that the astronauts would have known the difference between radio interference and their spacey music. Coming in at number 8 now, we have snakes in space. In 1994, Dr. Story Musgrave did an interview where he described his career as an astronaut, and one particular time which shook him to that day. He said, "On 2 of my missions, I still don't have an answer. I have seen a snake out there, 6, 7, 8 feet long. It is rubbery because it has internal waves in it, and it follows you for a rather long period of time. The more you fly in space, the more you see an incredible amount of things out there, and that sort of thing brings to you really a certainty that other living creatures are out there." Now usually an account like this might be dismissed, but Musgrave is a doctor, he has 6 academic degrees, is a trained mathematician, he was in the Marine Corps and was a NASA astronaut. He seems like a credible witness. He believes that there are advanced creatures existing in space itself, and that he has even tried to communicate with them in the hopes that they come down and get him. Whatever that means. Next up at number 7 now, we have docking. In 1995, famous Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield had his first space flight. His job was to relay the speed and range information to the pilot as they were docking into the Russian Mir space station. Any mistakes could have resulted in a total disaster. Too soft and they would have just bounced off. Too hard and they would have broken the space station in half, killing the 3 people on board. Everything was going smoothly, but then one of the sensors started telling them they were 32 feet away, the other said 20 feet away, which was correct. If they didn't solve the problem in 30 seconds, it was over for them. Hadfield had to calculate how far they were away in his head, timing it with his stopwatch to decide when they should fire their thrusters. Luckily, they ended up being spot on and they docked almost perfectly. It took a few minutes before the astronauts began to realize they had done it. They were alive, they had avoided a space disaster, and they had lived to tell the tale. Moving on now to number 6, we have impossible. On May 5th, 1981, Russian cosmonaut Vladimir Kovalyonok looked out of his portal of the Salyut orbital space station. He then saw something which seemed inexplicable to him. When he returned to Earth, he told the world at a conference what he had seen. He said, "Many cosmonauts have seen phenomena which are far beyond the experiences of Earthmen. For 10 years, I have never spoke on such things. The encounter you asked me about happened on May 5th, 1981 at about 6 p.m. during the Salyut mission. At that time, we were over the area of South Africa, moving towards the area of the Indian Ocean. I just made some gymnastic exercises when I saw in front of me, through a porthole, an object which I could not explain. I saw this object, and then something happened that I could not explain, something impossible according to the laws of physics. The object had this shape, elliptical, and it flew with us. From a frontal view, it looked like it would rotate in flight direction. It only flew straight, but then a kind of explosion happened, very beautiful to watch, of golden light. That was the first part. Then, 1 or 2 seconds later, a second explosion followed somewhere else, and 2 spheres appeared, golden and very beautiful. After this explosion, I just saw white smoke, then a cloud-like sphere. Before we entered the darkness, we flew through the Terminator, the twilight zone between day and night. We flew eastwards, and when we entered the darkness of the Earth's shadow, I could see them no longer. The 2 spheres never returned." That was the end of the quote. There have rarely been descriptions so vivid and detailed, and many people who hear Kovalyonok's story hold it up as proof of extraterrestrial life. Moving on now to number 5, we have toxic. In the mid-90s, Bob Kerbean took part on his first spacewalk as an astronaut. Unfortunately, disaster struck when a connector to a hose began to leak on the outside, spraying toxic ammonia all over him. He couldn't get back inside the space station covered in that stuff. He managed to stay calm and he fixed the leak, but he was still contaminated. He came up with a plan. Ammonia has a low boiling point, and so Bob decided to literally bake himself in the sunlight of space for an extra 30 minutes in order to vaporize the ammonia off him. He had to just sit out there in space, hoping that he got all the ammonia off and that he didn't poison the crew and himself when he got back into the station. It was a success. His plan worked, but it was one of the most surreal and scary moments an astronaut could ever experience. Next up at number 4 now, we have the lights. In 2005, astronaut Leroy Chiao was commander on the International Space Station for over 6 months. He was once doing a spacewalk to repair some antennas when something caught his eye. He saw some lights that seemed to be in a line, almost like an upside down check mark. They flew right past him, but his fellow astronaut didn't see because they were facing the other way. When he described the sighting to those back on the ground, they dismissed it as a fishing boat hundreds of miles below him. Chiao himself had stated that he doesn't believe there's ever been any tangible evidence that someone else is visiting Earth or has done so in the past. He has simply told his story as it is and is leaving all of the explaining up to everyone else. Coming in at number 3 now, we have the drifter. Now for some people, the biggest fear they have about space is that feeling of drifting away from the space station, unable to claw themselves back. Well, Scott Parazinski may have had the closest experience to that. He was performing a spacewalk when a jammed solar panel threatened the safety of the entire space station and the crew inside. After 72 hours, NASA came up with a plan. Scott was told to travel further away from the safety of an airlock than had ever been attempted. He later said in an interview, there was a real danger that we could do even worse damage to the space station. Then there was the potential of risk to myself because if there was any metal to metal connection with the solar panel or arcing, I could actually electrocute myself or cause ignition of the 100% oxygen in my spacesuit. The stakes were high, but Scott succeeded. Disaster was averted, but sadly many of Scott's heroics are still not known by the masses. Moving on to number 2 now, we have the secret transmission. In 1975, retired chief of NASA Communications Systems, Maurice Chatelain, published his book, Our Cosmic Ancestors. In it, he made an extraordinary claim about the first manned mission to the moon. He said, only moments before Armstrong stepped down the ladder to set foot on the moon, 2 UFOs hovered overhead. Edwin Aldrin took several pictures of them. Some of these photographs have been published in the June 1975 issue of Modern People magazine. Now this claim was linked to the story that there were 2 minutes of radio silence after Armstrong set foot on the moon. People claim that the lost audio was of him saying, "These babies were huge, sir, enormous. Oh God, you wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecraft out here lined up on the far side of the crater's edge. They're on the moon watching us." Now of course, all of this is speculation. An actual recording of that audio or of those pictures has never surfaced. That either means it didn't happen at all or it's been covered up very, very well. Either way, it's a creepy story. And finally, number 1 now, we have the Green Bolt. Gordon Cooper was a well-known astronaut who flew on the Mercury 9 and Gemini 5 missions. He was the last American to fly alone in space. In 1963, he flew aboard the Mercury capsule for a circumnavigational trip around the world. Everything seemed to be going okay, and then on his final orbit, as he passed over Perth, Australia, he saw a green object swing towards him at an incredible speed. At first, he thought it was just a figment of his imagination. There have been times where pilots and astronauts have seen objects like this, but their equipment detected nothing. This time was different though. The Moochia tracking station in Western Australia actually picked the object up on their radar. That was huge. Now he had something solid to back up his own experience. He reported the incident to the National Broadcasting Company. When he returned to Earth, he was eager to tell his side of the story, but Gordon claims he was approached by NBC reporters who told him they had been instructed to not question him about the sighting. All of this has only fanned the flames of a UFO conspiracy.